Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub. Welcome to part 2 of our L'Chaim Roundtable with 4 wonderful panelists. Let me introduce them to you once again. Thane Rosenbaum is a distinguished fellow at NYU Law School. He's the founding director of the Forum on Law, Culture, and Society. He's a prolific essayist and award-winning novelist. His most recent work is How Sweet It Is, a fictionalized account of growing up in Miami Beach in the watershed year of 1972. Eric Yaffe, a Reform rabbi, led Reform Jewry for 16 years as the president of the Union for Reform Judaism, the organization of Reform synagogues in North America. And since his stepping down from that position in 2012, Eric has become a leading Jewish columnist, writing extensively for Haaretz. You can also read Eric's column at ericyaffe.com. Naomi Vilko is the founding president of Advocates for Israel, which provides education programming about Israel. Many of the organization's programs have been held in New York City and in Princeton, New Jersey. In addition, Dr. Naomi Vilko is a practicing psychiatrist. And we're joined by Micah Halpern, whose syndicated political and foreign affairs blog is entitled The Micah Report, an expert on terrorism. Micah has addressed terror analysts at the White House and at the Justice Department. And of course, you can see Micah every Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. right here on JBS for his series, Thinking Out Loud. Thank you once again for joining me. It's wonderful to be sitting with all 4 of you. I want to quickly summarize, if you weren't with us for part 1, what you missed. And if I don't have it right, I'm sure our panelists can add to my comments. We basically spoke about the basic law that Israel passed recently on the issue of Israel being the nation state of the Jewish people. And there were some issues raised about whether that law is in some way either discriminatory or in some way does not do enough to represent the values inherent in Israel's Declaration of Independence. And I hope if you didn't see that, you'll go online or you'll see it when we replay it here on JBS. We also spoke about the fact that there is still a disconnect between the Orthodox establishment in Israel and its monopoly of power in the state of Israel, and how Jewish pluralism, especially the Jewish pluralism that we experience here in America, has not been embraced formally by the state of Israel for political reasons, the ultra-Orthodox parties being part of the coalition government, and therefore the deal at the Western Wall, which was supposed to create an egalitarian section for men and women to stand together, for women to be able to pray at the Western Wall, to read the Torah at the Western Wall. That fell apart this summer to the dismay of many people and to the outrage of many American Jews. And the other thing we talked about on part 1 was what should American Jewish leadership's position be when American Jewish leaders address Jews, the average American Jew, who is somehow disappointed or disaffected or even feels betrayed by the state of Israel because it does not embrace American Jewish pluralism. How do non-Orthodox Jews handle the fact that Israel as a state has in essence a state religion and it's Orthodox Judaism? And the point that was made, and I made it to Eric Yaffe, and Eric, I believe it's fair to say you agreed with me, said that even if American Jewish leaders are very upset with the decisions made by the Israeli government and their failure to move forward with the egalitarian section at the Western Wall, every American Jewish leader should be sure that their constituents know Israel still embraces them as people, that there is no reason for any American Jew to feel as if Israel is rejecting them. There's no reason for any American Jew to feel disaffected from or distanced from the state of Israel. And there's certainly no reason for any American Jew to say he is going to or she is going to support Israel less, either with their money or their political support. And one of the things that concerns me is that in the midst of all of the issues, I feel that non-Orthodox Jewish leadership here in America has not said that strongly enough to their congregations, their organizations. And what I would hope happens is that American Jewish leadership really begins to combat and to take on this anti-Israel bias, which seems to be growing in the non-Orthodox American Jewish community. And since, again, I referred to you, is there anything you want to add to what I've said in this regard?
I think you summed it up very well. What I said in the last show was our commitment to Israel is unconditional, but not uncritical. I think that's what we have to keep in mind, both sides of that equation, but the unconditional support is absolutely essential.
Okay. So, Thane, I want to begin with you, picking up exactly on Eric's point. The question is, where and how do American Jews express their criticism of Israel? On our last program, I mentioned the fact that the president of the World Jewish Congress, Ron Lauder, published a piece, an op-ed piece in the New York Times, just slamming Israel, both on the Jewish pluralism issue and on the basic law. And his contention was that Israel's democratic nature is being lost, and that as a result, American Jews, especially young American Jews, are going to feel disaffected and move away from Israel. And we've just heard from Eric, and I think it was an idea shared by all of us. No one here believes that American Jews should move away from the state of Israel. The question becomes, and Naomi spoke to this a little bit in our first program, if we agree that American Jews have the right to express their criticism, where should the criticism be? Should it be in the pages of the New York Times? Should it be in the Jewish Week and the Forward? Should it be on JBS? Or should it in some way be a more private disagreement? And there are those who argue that if it's private, it is ineffective. What's your sense of how American Jews who have trouble with issues in the state of Israel, but still are committed to Israel, where and how should they express that criticism?
Well, for one thing, the editorial board of the New York Times must have loved Lauder's essay because it buys into a premise that is popular in the mainstream media, which is that Israel is not a real democracy, that Israel is not a superior nation in the Middle East, that it is not a perfect society. There's an endless sort of devaluing of Israel's democratic and liberal culture, whether it comes to the treatment of women or treatment of homosexuals. This is what drives Israelis crazy, right? Because they understand that, in fact, this is a liberal, pluralistic, multi-ethnic society, and we don't torch homosexuals and throw them off of buildings. We have Gay Pride Week here, right? And everyone here lives with a basic decency and dignity and equality.
Here meaning Israel.
In Israel. So, anything that makes it appear as if two things are happening. One, Israel is an imperfect democracy, if a democracy at all. And two, that younger Americans no longer are interested in Israel. This is a very popular way of entering into a conversation about Israel, right? The withdrawal of support, the kind of moral censure from a basic American community, especially younger millennials who say, Israel is a soiled society. I can't get behind this society. And so this is, unfortunately, what the Lauder essay buys into. He doesn't mean to, I hope. He doesn't even say it that way. But I have no doubt that it would be read that way by the readers of the New York Times. And for those people who want to be critical of Israel in every part of its identity. Look, Israel is now a confident society. We mentioned in the last episode that it's the sixth economy, strongest economy.
Eighth greatest power.
Power, right. It's not even an economy. Greatest power in the world. 11th happiest people. And so that you could make the argument that if you're the 8th most powerful country in the world, you can hear stuff from your people. And you can hear it in any format in which it's delivered, in any venue. The era of the Jews not in front of the Gentiles, right? What is it, Shanda, not to speak in front of the Gentiles because it'll be used in a negative way. I suspect that, Israelis are over that, right? Because it's one of the reasons they take some of the positions they take. Because I think that they don't feel that their job is to seduce the diaspora. I think that that's what the confidence of their society is. So I think there's one school of thought that would say Israel can take it. If it's truly a democracy, if it believes in a free press, if it can exist in a society with haaretz, it can listen to lauder in the New York Times, right? If it can tolerate one, it can tolerate the others. There are others, I'm sure my friend Dr. Vilko would say, look, Israel is always vulnerable to this, and it's never a good thing to just demonize and beat it up. The one area where I think that there is, for me, always a bright line, and I said this on JBS over many years, is Israel's security is an area in which, even as an essayist on human rights and international security and terrorism, even I don't feel comfortable telling the Israelis what to do, to express my disfavor of positions that's taken. And it's actually consistent with some of their own attitudes about the diaspora. Your children don't fight to defend this country. And that's the bright line test. Now, that is, what I just said is a very unpopular view. I'm sure Eric feels that way, that it doesn't matter who fights in the, we all have this connection to our historic homeland. And these acts can't be done in our name. Look, the forward already is critical of Israel. That's seemingly what its job is, its existence. So Israel has a robust press. Haaretz is certainly a good example. The United States, again, has venues where criticism is possible. To me, the question is the quality of the criticism. And that I would take issue with Lauder's essay. Because it was just, it was poorly argued, and it wasn't particularly interesting or persuasive. And again, I think it just did a kind of, it bought into a premise that I'm not even sure is true, right? It's this premise of the withdrawal of millennial support. I think that this is something that's been labeled as a crisis.
Yes.
And it's not one that I'm not convinced that it's true. I think that if the Pew poll, the last time they came out, and this was after Gaza, I always reach out to this because even when a broad cross-section of American Jewry, when they said, who do you think is most responsible for the impasse between the Palestinians and the Israelis? Most American Jews, over 70%, say the Palestinians. If you ask most American Jews, have they responded disproportionately to attacks by Gazans? A majority of the Jews say no, that they have not. Yes, the New York Times thinks that's true. Yes, President Obama thought that was true. But I don't think most, well-meaning people looking at that region think that's true. And I certainly don't think that's what most American Jews think.
But you are saying that you are not critical of Jews writing or expressing their criticism in the New York Times.
No, I'm
not. Very good. Okay. No. Naomi, you heard how Eric feels about this. What's your sense? What would you say is the appropriate either venue or level of critique to be expressed by Jews who have serious concerns about some issue in Israel?
So I think that criticizing Israel for going right is unfair. And I think a lot of what is written, whether it's in the mainstream press or in Jewish newsletters like The Forward and Haaretz, have untruths in them or exaggerations. And so the school press is another issue. What the students hear, as what Thane was discussing with the millennium. I predict that there'll be a problem going forward because living in Princeton, I believe that most students finishing Princeton University have not heard one good thing about Israel. They've heard a lot of lies, frank lies, and a lot of criticisms. So I do think we need to be careful, because the thing that most Israelis are afraid of now is they're a powerhouse, right, militarily. That could go in a second. I mean, Iran's a big threat, not so much the Palestinians. But I think that BDS has gotten worse and worse and worse as Israel's been able to defend itself economically and militarily. And I worry about people that don't watch JBS, that don't hear the nuances, that don't hear the full story, that just read the New York Times and, you know, the mainstream media and maybe the Forward, and accept what they're saying.
By the way, I think you say it beautifully. I do, however, want bottom line for you. If people are critical of Israel, and let's say they are people who are committed to the state of Israel, is it appropriate from your perspective for them to publish an op-ed in the New York Times?
No.
What should they do?
They should, you know, publish it internally, even if it's still public.
We're talking about the Jewish Week, the Forward, JBS.
Right. Not in the New York Times.
Okay. All right. Look, you write, you speak, you're on television everywhere. What do you say to this issue?
Well, I'll begin by saying that Israel's a big boy, and they could take the critique. They might not like it, and they might hit back, but they could take it. And that's the first thing. The second is that critique is actually good. And there's a difference between criticism and critique, and I want to make that important distinction here. A lot of it has to do with tone. I think it's something you touched on in an earlier discussion, and Eric raised it again at the introduction of this discussion. The tone is essential. That is, if you begin with the premise that Israel has no right to exist, or that Israel's destruction will be the resolution of the problem, then I don't think, you could write whatever you want, but I don't like the fact that it's going out there the way it is.
But those are not people committed to the state of Israel.
Exactly.
I'm talking about people committed to the state of Israel.
Right, but they're deeply committed to Israel's destruction, or at least to solving a problem on Israel's back.
Yes, and I'm saying I'm not interested in those people, and we're not talking about those people.
But then there's another group of people who fit into this category who, in general, the tone of their critique is extremely destructive. And that's the problem. You see, the greatness of op-ed writing, as an essayist, as an op-ed writer, is that you stimulate conversation and dialogue. You're not always right. I am, of course, but you're not always right. But the objective is to get people talking and thinking and writing back and dealing with issues, moving them beyond the stagnant state that they're in right now. And you can only do that on op-eds. You can't do it anywhere else. If we had other kinds of, if people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s were doing memes and stuff like that on YouTube, we would be effective if we were watching them. But that's only for younger kids. We could do that for younger people. The reality is that this is the method of dialogue, discussion, and to foster real debate. But debate which is respectful on both sides. The problem with a lot of these criticisms is they're not respectful. And that's where the problem is. Now, I don't say they don't have the right to do it. I don't really care about that. They will speak about it. But you can feel it even in your discussion. When you begin reading the first paragraph of most of these essays, you know whether or not you're going to be distraught, frustrated, angered, or invigorated by the dialogue. Okay. You know it immediately. And a lot has to do with choice of words. Not necessarily even what they're talking about. Just the choice of words that you use. And look, we craft, I'm a wordsmith. We craft our words. We do it deliberately. And believe me, when I want to upset someone, I'll do it. I don't accidentally do it, right? It's not by chance. And that's the point here. A lot of these people's objective is to upset. And that's how they make their reputation, by the way. A lot of them make their reputation by upsetting either the apple cart or upsetting people or trying to say, I'm different, I'm superior, I'm superior.
Are you saying it's self-serving?
No, I think that it's more than self-serving. I think it's to the point where actually they want to buy into a particular stream. They want to be picked up again by the same paper. They actually buy into a larger narrative, which I find problematic because that is not the dialogue that we're finding. And you'll look at certain op-ed pages and you'll see that they're almost cookie cutter in terms of who's writing, what's writing, and the ideas that come out. That's disturbing because what it is it's destructive to it's anti-intellectual. And that's, I think, cheating.
Okay. But Micah, Thane has said he does think it's appropriate for Jews to express criticism in the New York Times.
Yeah.
Naomi says it is not. What do you say?
Yeah, I think that Jews and the New York Times, and I would hope that the better writing and the better critique in the New York Times, as opposed to just out-and-out criticism, would raise the level of the New York Times. Actually, I'm disappointed in some of the New York Times pieces, and not just the Ron Lauder thing, because they've changed over the last 6 months. They've actually changed their writers and their editorial board to the point where I'm feeling the tone, and the tone is not moving in the direction that I'm speaking about in terms of a give and take, ideas, excitement, raising the level of discussion.
Isn't that disappointing?
I'm disappointed, and that's exactly my expression. I'm disappointed because if it should be anywhere, it should be in the New York Times.
Yes.
That doesn't mean I'm going to stop reading the Times. I'm still reading it. But the point is that that's the place where that dialogue should take place. I'm disappointed intellectually. I'm disappointed in their writing style, but even more so, I'm disappointed because who says, and this is a classic example, who says because I'm critical or I love Israel, I have to be anti-Palestinian, by the way? Who says that? In the New York Times, that's where you are. And that's a really strange thing. Or vice versa. I'm pro-Palestinian, which means I have to be anti. Yes. Who says that that's the case? Now, by the way, I'm unabashedly pro-Israel. You've got to understand that. It's a given, right? But does that mean I stand against the Palestinians? No. When they do the wrong thing, I stand against them.
Okay. Before I ask you to answer, I want to make sure I've explained what dimension I'm looking for. You talked about the issue, do we air our dirty laundry in public? It used to be in front of the Goyim. That is a concern. I think it's less of a concern today. The concern that I hear people express is that very often the criticism that is expressed in the New York Times will be used by people who are out to hurt Israel. And that what we are doing by being critical in a secular public context is feeding information to the anti-Israel, maybe anti-Semite. And therefore we're not doing Israel a favor, even if there is substance to our critique. It will be used against us or against Israel in ways that will be harmful for the state of Israel. And therefore, the question is asked, are we better off not expressing our criticism in the New York Times, the Huffington Post, as opposed to what Naomi is saying, it's different if it's in the family, although again, in the family now is on the internet, everybody sees it as well. But that's the question. Does criticism of Israel in secular media, is it somehow, are we giving aid and comfort to the enemy? So where do you stand on the whole issue?
I think we need to move beyond this discussion, to tell you the truth. I think it first arose in the 70s after the Six-Day War, when you had groups that were opposing Israeli policy. And these various issues, I remember as a rabbinical student, yes. Hearing about them. I'm not sure how relevant much of this is for some of the reasons that you've indicated. Look what's happened to the media. I mean, the difference between inside the family and outside the family. Look at the options that we have in terms of media. Look at the social media. Look at the web. Anything that starts out in the family ends up out in the world, and vice versa. So there's that simple reality of how we communicate today and how we use the media and the multiplicity of voices that we have. The notion that there's any controlling of this seems to me no longer to be even a remote possibility. That's the first point. The second point is, in terms of what's my responsibility? Look, I'm a Zionist. I believe that Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people. I take my connection to Israel very seriously. So I don't have to apologize for anything that I say about Israel. I have not only a right, I have a responsibility to express my views as frequently as I can, as fervently as I can, hopefully in a respectful and responsible way. But the notion that we should try and tamp down this conversation in any sense seems to me to make, to be illogical altogether. We want an active conversation, and we can't invite people into the Zionist world and into the pro-Israel world and then say, by the way, we expect you to shut up when we come to a sensitive and difficult issue. And many young people, including those who are very open to Israel, that's what they're hearing. And my third and final point, I want to pick up on something I think Thane said, this notion that Israel somehow is the victim here. Israel is weak. Israel is vulnerable. Look, we have to be careful and cautious always, because there's always anti-Semitism, there are always Israel haters, and Israel is surrounded by enemies. All those things are true. The fact of the matter is Israel is a strong country. It's strong militarily, has good relations right now with the United States. And not only that, as Thane indicated, virtually all the polls that you look at measure Israel's standing with the American public in general, with the Jewish public as well. They all have very positive results. Israel is not looked upon by the greater American people somehow as being either evil or on the wrong side of history. That simply is not the reality. So I think we just take pride in Israel. We need to fight the battle for Israel, but let's not suppose she's more vulnerable and more weak than she actually is.
Would you say the same thing, by the way, about the campus situation?
The campus situation, I want to acknowledge, confuses me. I'm not on the campus. I occasionally speak on campus. It's very hard to get a clear picture on campus. Most of the speaking I've done has been in either smaller religious campuses or in Midwest and so on, where I have found virtually no anti-Israel sentiment of any kind. It virtually does not exist. From my kids and their friends and others who have been on major Eastern campuses recently, I get a very mixed picture. So I want to admit I'm not entirely sure what's going on there. BDS is a factor. My general sense is BDS is a failure. It seemed to me if we were going to judge, have they done what they've tried to do? And the answer is no. They have not. Have they poisoned some minds? Probably so. But I'm not in a state of panic about what's going on. I think the Jewish community has done a reasonably good job of defending Israel's cause and case on the campus, including the more prestigious Eastern campuses, which we tend to hear about most often.
Being in Princeton and actually trying to get programs scheduled, even Ron Prosar was canceled by a professor at Princeton. I can tell you, I witnessed what's happening at Princeton. Now, you could interpret it as, alarming or not. But the reality is that the children here, and from anti-Israel professors every semester if they take liberal arts classes, and they hear from people that call for the Kairos document to be implemented, which is the stage plan for the Arabs to take over all of Eretz Yisrael. Terrible criticism, lies. I mean, I don't object to discussions, but just lies. Whereas if you try, as an organization, to get a pro-Israel speaker or an Israeli to speak at the Woodrow Wilson School, it doesn't happen. They can speak in the basement with 12 Zionist children from Hillel. So I've been, that's really how I got involved between my synagogue that I used to belong to and the atmosphere in the township of Princeton, which we call town and gown. We're very dependent on the campus. I got really alarmed that people, it's not just criticism. Criticism is okay as long as it's not a lie and as long as it's in the context of knowing something about the history of your people, the history of the conflict, the history of Israel.
Any comment? You mean you're on campus, for heaven's sakes?
Yeah, it's just misery.
Is it really?
Yeah, I mean it's at any Eastern university or California universities as well. Israel is a non-starter. I mean it is. extremely unfashionable to take a pro-Israel position. And people who have even more agnostic views about Israel are roundly criticized, attacked as human rights violators. And it is sad to see. It's ahistorical, it's anti-intellectual, it's intellectually dishonest. I mean, just at a university to be exposed to this.
So how does it exist this way?
Well, liberal arts professors have pretty much hijacked this issue. It's not really so much in business school and the medical school. It's really in the humanities. With the end of the isms, communism, postmodernism, right, structural. When you see the end of the isms, the one ism that now has clinged to the left is anti-colonialism. And what you see is a kind of attack on whiteness, privilege, right? Colonial, it's anti-colonial, and it's, this idea of there is, checking your privilege at the door, this concept of always remember that the white person is the oppressor. And Jews are perceived as white people with power. They're not perceived as victims of the Holocaust or people who've spent 2,000 years of persecution of anti-Semitic, Christian anti-Semitism. They're just perceived as white privileged Americans. And Israel is perceived as a colonial power that is in the Middle East, populated by Europeans. There's an utter rejection to the idea of the Mizrahi Jew, that there's anything inherent or native that's Jewish in Israel. To them,
the Jews stole the land.
The Jews from Brooklyn stole the land.
Land.
That's so. This is the narrative. It's a very deep one. There are no faculty members that are interested in a counter narrative at all. Jewish professors are either afraid to speak, or they've just made a decision that life is short, and they keep their heads down.
It's not worth the bother.
Yeah, and one of the things that has been impossible for me is I just never did that. And so being a pariah on campuses is something my entire experience is because it's just I wasn't built that way. I'm not critical of anyone because I understand why they would do that. The other thing that you see on campus, which to me is distressing in the way that writing for the Times is not, which is you have a kind of, false Jewish heroism of leftist Jews, liberal Jews, who say, look at me, I'm Jewish, I have been to Israel, but I reject Israel now. A kind of moral narcissism. Israel has offended me personally, and I will not love it again. And that is a very fashionable position to take, to show yourself. And this is why you see these sort of crazy things on campus, where Jews are aligning themselves with this sort of intersectional movement, right? Many of your audience probably knows the concept of the intersectional movement is to say that that all groups that have been oppressed share the same common oppressor, even if they're really not. All right, and so therefore, this is why you see Black Lives Matter lining up with the Palestinian cause, when in fact, African Americans, Africans, people of dark skin, would not do well, in Gaza. They would not do well in the Palestinian Authority. People who are in LGBT rights lining up with the Palestinian cause. Really, what happens to homosexuals who are Palestinians? The fact that the only place in the Middle East that's safe for a homosexual to live is Israel is beside the point. The idea is that we all share a common white colonial oppressor. That's what's happened on campus. It's been hijacked, it's been distorted, it's anti-intellectual, and it has created an incredibly hostile environment. Now, the question is, what's the effect of it? We have a lost generation of Jews who are completely alienated?
Yes. Will the elite students at campus today grow up thinking that Israel is the oppressor?
Yeah. Look, there's no doubt that this is, I've always felt, sometimes when I speak at campuses and I'm getting booed, I learned that the people, some of them are Jews, right? I always think to myself, this happened to me at Berkeley recently. There was a woman with, I hope she's watching, I doubt it, but she was had purple hair, and she was screaming at me, all the land that the Jews have, all the land. And I was thinking, you're an idiot. Like, you're really a moron. This is the University of California in Berkeley. What land are you talking about? As I was walking out of the auditorium that day, it was another unpleasant hour for Thane Rosenbaum. As I was walking out, one of the Jewish students that had invited me, the groups that invited me, came and says, there's something you should know about the girl with the purple hair. And I went, what's that? And she said, well, first of all, she's Jewish. And I went, really? And he goes, it's worse than that. Her father is Israeli, but she's been estranged from him for 20 years. And that's what you're experiencing. Now, you know what I actually think? In 10 years, she won't say that. Mm-hmm. I want to believe that this is what you would say when you're stupid and 19, right? Or you're really mad at your father, right? So you come and take it out on Thane Rosenbaum. I can take it. I could care less what she thinks. But I want to believe that as we always know, as we get older, we actually grow, we become more tribal. We become more conservative. Our values change to some degree. I'm not sure that this is a lost generation. I don't know. I don't want to believe in it. But I do know that when people say, stop focusing on neo-Nazism in the United States, focus on anti-Semitism of the left, they're not wrong. Because that's where the action is. It's at intellectual magazines on university campuses. Because it is a kind of bizarre, surreal world that is completely unfamiliar to any fair-minded, intelligent, well-read person who would not actually think that the Israelis are the greatest human rights violators in the history of the planet.
I am waiting now for writers like you and you and you to begin writing that the pro-Palestinian movement is intrinsically immoral. That basically, to support the Palestinian movement as it is constituted today, this, by the way, does not mean Palestinians individually, but the movement to support Palestinians on campus is intrinsically immoral. You're supporting a people who say another nation state should not exist. In and of itself, that disqualifies it from any moral character. They also are quite open about saying that their means will be violent. And not violent against another army, but violent against a civilian population. They also do not have a democracy. They do not have a free press. They do not treat women or gays in any way that is of a moral nature as we understand it. And my own feeling is it's time now for American Jews to begin to say, you got to be kidding. You want to yell and scream, but any Jew who aligns himself with a pro-Palestinian orientation is fundamentally immoral.
But again, on campus, you'll get invited to the better party.
If you are immoral.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, the culture on campus will reward you for standing in that line and screaming at a pro-Israel speaker.
Yeah, it sounds like a Woody Allen line, by the way, which I won't refer to.
Oh, do.
From Annie Hall. But I do want to begin with two sort of, one cliche and one expression. The cliche is one doesn't become conservative until one has something to conserve. And so one would hope that as the students get a little older, they might realize that there's something to conserve there. And that's with a small c, not necessarily, not politically, but you understand what I'm saying. And then as they get more mature, that might happen. The second is the great historian Bernard Wasserstein referred to this in an unbelievable essay where he spoke about the question of Jewish self-haters and Jewish self-hatred. And it was interesting because he said they're not Jewish self-haters. There's no such thing as Jewish self-hatred. Instead, he says these are Jews who hate Jews. They're Jewish anti-Semites. They hate Jews who act Jewishly. So if you're a proud Jew, you will be hated by these Jews. Now, there's no better expression in today's world than a proud Jew than a Zionist and an Israeli. And hence, as a result of that, you get this tremendous backlash amongst those who actually despise Jewish Jews. Jewish meaning the adjective Jewish. Jews, if I could not make it with a capital J, I would do that. You get my point here. In other words, the notion that Washington's brilliant here, because what he's saying is they don't hate themselves, they like themselves. What they don't like is Jews who act Jewishly, and Jews who are proud of being Jewish, and Jews who embrace ideas, Jews who run with the Jews, Jews that organize Jewish activities.
Why do they hate them?
Okay, because there are several reasons behind that attitude that Wasserstein doesn't go into, but I can. The major reason is that it identifies them as separate, maybe even as superior. It shows those people look at themselves as different. And I want to be with the masses. Well, I'm totally successful in my assimilation. And my assimilation means that I will hate people who think I should be like them, or like my parents, or like my grandparents. And as a result, we have this huge backlash. And as a result, I'm telling you also there's going to be a huge split. Many of these Jews, by the way, are lost to the Jewish community. They will not come back. Some hopefully will. But they're going to come back out of love and romance, not because we make it more liberal for them. They're going to come back because they're engaged with an idea which excites them, integrates with them. So I don't think that they're upset by Israel's policy about this or policy about this and everything else. The question was, will they engage about something significant in their lives that Israel touches them? It's not going to be anti-Semitism, because they're part of the anti-Semitic trope. And once upon a time, our parents' generation and our grandparents' generation, people became Jewish, committed to Judaism, connected to Judaism, because the only way to unite against anti-Semitism was to show a united front within the Jewish world. Today, anti-Semitism is on the rise, but these particular Jewish students and others do not feel that. They have no interest in that. They don't see the anti-Semitism. They don't even see that they foster it. They give credibility to it. It's interesting, in the essay I wrote for the Post 2 weeks ago, and I did it on my show last week here, I talked about the great disputation in 1263 between Pablo Cristiani and the Ramban, Nachmanides, where Cristiani was a rabbi who converted to Christianity. And he was really good in his debate against the Ramban. He was spectacular. Why was he so good? Not just because he was formerly a rabbi, because he gave credibility to his arguments. So when you're a Jew and you give credibility to the enemy, forget about being a traitor. Of course he's a traitor. That's a different issue. What you've given is to all those people watching. Just saying, well, maybe it's an even-handed thing here. The Jews who are pro-Israel and the Jews who are anti-Israel. Well, that should not be the way in which the equation works. And it's deeply disturbing to me. And it's our job to make certain that those people engaged in ideas realize that that's a marginal group of people who are bending over backwards to do something not Jewish.
Yes. You were going to say?
So I would recommend another psychiatrist's book, The Oslo Syndrome, which The Delusions of a People Under Siege by Ken Levin, which really goes into the actual psychological causes on a deeper level. Also, interestingly, he has a PhD in history. The first 2/3 of the book are the history of the Jewish people. What worries me is not only the criticism, but I think that in the past, Jews were forced to be together because there was so much discrimination. Young as I am, even when I applied to schools, there was plenty of discrimination. Now, in America, we don't feel it so much. I grew up with it, but most people really, my age, didn't experience it here. Their parents did. So I don't think we're doing a good enough job with our children.
To do what?
Teaching them the wonder of Israel. In other words, you could criticize Israel, but you should also know what, if I believed in miracles, I would believe that Israel was a miracle, okay? Because there's no other explanation to how this country survived all the attacks. Okay. But the other thing I wanted to say is the sedition even permeates medicine thing, unfortunately. We used to say, and Alan Dershowitz always said, that what you said, the business schools, the law schools, the medical schools are okay. Not anymore. Lancet, the medical journal in England.
Right.
Yeah,
That's
but still. Right. But still, this is supposed to be a vetted, the articles are not only edited, they're supposed to be looked into for accuracy.
Peer-reviewed.
Yeah, I mean, if I tell you to take a certain blood pressure medicine and it's really the opposite thing for you. And this is from an article I read. That's terrible. I could kill people. So they're supposed to be under a fine tooth comb without debate whether something's positive or negative. And they've had a gazillion articles, whole editions, dedicated to denigrating Israel. Camera called them out on it. Finally, they have a good, better editor. I understand, I don't get the journal myself. I looked at the articles, but that's very alarming. And just because it's in England doesn't mean it won't come here to the younger doctors.
My observation is this. I believe now, as I have believed for 50 years, that if there is ultimately to be some resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it will be a two-state solution. It will be a Jewish state living alongside a Palestinian state in peace and security, each recognizing the legitimacy of the other. So the point is that will require a Palestinian national movement. So as Micah said before, there's no reason for us to be anti-Palestinian or against the concept of a national movement that will push for an appropriate and necessary solution to the conflict.
I just don't see it.
Yes, you're raising the point that as of right now, such a movement does not exist.
Correct.
The Palestinians are divided. We don't even have to go into that.
Well, it's not about nation building.
They have been, unfortunately, basically a murderous, terror-oriented national movement for most of their existence.
My point was, how do you possibly support that?
There have been, occasionally there are pockets of slight moderation. Occasionally you can find a single individual here or there who will say some sensible things. But if you look at the movement as a whole right now, you can't really find that. But nonetheless, building such a movement, seeing such a movement in terms of an aspirational approach to this, I think that's got to remain on our radar. We should be careful not to say that we will never support a Palestinian movement. If there's a reasonable movement that embraces peace, as we understand that, then of course we'll support it.
Yes, by the way, I would hope that there's not a person watching JBS now who does not understand and agree with you 100%. And what you've said, I want to say it again, you tell me if I've got it right. Eric Yaffe acknowledges, sadly, tragically, there is no Palestinian leadership now that's ready to live side by side with a Jewish state. And as a result, no two-state solution is possible. And Israel has to now strategize for how do you live in a region where there's a people that literally wants to kill you and destroy your national existence. At the same time, since the 1930s, the formal position of the Zionist movement has been, we will share the land. Since 1938, David Ben-Gurion and everybody who was associated with the Yishuv, the Jewish Agency, the modern state of Israel, has said, if there is ever a Palestinian people who want to live next to us like Canada lives with the United States. And one of the things you once said on JBS, which I thought was so wonderful, you said we're not looking for a marriage, we're looking for an amicable divorce. All we want to do is live side by side without enmity. If the Palestinians ever want to live side by side with the Israeli without violence, I believe the 80% of the Israeli people will say to the government, you do it tomorrow, and not only that, we'll help fund you, we'll help organize you, and we'll create a region where we work together to the extent to which you want to work together. And I think that every Jew who appreciates the Zionist movement should be there. And what you're cautioning is, because a person says, I'm against the two-state solution, what they really mean is, I'm against the two-state solution with the existing regime in the Palestinian world. But if the Palestinian regime ever changed, I'm open to working with them. And your point has always been, we should today not make that moment impossible in the future. Do I have it right?
Fair summary.
Okay. Any comment?
Just I hope the Messiah comes.
Yes, but I agree. I mean, it's not about our lifetime.
Yeah, there's
it's
no
about
way.
my children's lifetime, and there would have to be such an enormous change.
Israelis are very practical people, very practical people. And so to create a horizon-related dream is as if to say it just doesn't exist. They're not. Israelis would like to have peace. I don't think there's any question about that. Left, right, center, across the board. But the facts on the ground say not practical right now. They're practical people. Practicality says, it dictates a very different. Look, remember, it's not just the Palestinians, which are right there. It's that's the Palestinian Authority. You've got Hamas on the other side, with ISIS encroaching there. You've got Hezbollah on the other side, with Iran encroaching there. You've got Syria with Iran encroaching. You've got refugees with ISIS on the Jordanian border. You've got unbelievable, and this is just an hour drive from here, a 20-minute drive from there. These are real serious questions of Israel's survival. So to open up the opportunity of potentially having a Palestinian state at this moment would be naive in their eyes.
Yeah. You know, people get upset with my saying this, but they're upset, I believe, out of idealism, not out of reality.
Well, that's the practical part.
There are very few things in life which are black and white. There is at the moment black and white in the Middle East. There's not a thing Israel could do, not a policy it could change, not a policy it could implement that would make the Palestinian leadership that exists at the moment ready to say, yes, we're willing to live alongside a Jewish Israeli state.
It's even more. A Palestinian leadership, even if they changed, would not be able to change the Palestinian people at this stage, because they would have to change an entire educational movement. It would take a generation of change.
Therefore, it is time for American Jewish leaders to say, this isn't a problem of both sides. This has nothing to do with Netanyahu. It has nothing to do with Israel. Nothing to do with them. The reality is you've got an enemy whose only conviction, it's their conviction, is that there should be no Jewish state anywhere in the Middle East.
Yes.
And, you know, in an interesting way, it doesn't make them bad people, because they're not doing it consciously to be bad. It's just that's what they believe should be.
Well, I disagree with you there. There's an ethical question here. That is, when you desire the destruction of an entire people, I consider that bad.
Yes, I understand.
Putting children as mortifiers?
Yes, by the way, to that extent, I agree with you. What I'm trying to say is, sometimes we don't appreciate this is their worldview.
Yeah.
It isn't that they look at the world like we do and then say it doesn't matter. No. For them, this is the worldview. We haven't discussed this. We'll only take 5 minutes. Is anybody here feel that Israel used disproportionate force along the Gaza border? Do you feel that Israel in some way was culpable of anything inappropriate along the Gaza border?
No, and I get this from people who serve on the Gaza border.
Who say what? Who
say no, Israel did the best they possibly could. Israel has a better track record in terms of civilian casualties than any other country, especially than the U.S. Army.
There's a mistake. I think that people think of this expression, proportionate, disproportionate force, as literary terms, and they're not literary terms. So it doesn't mean, it's a legal term, it's an international legal term. I've written extensively on the question. It doesn't mean if they throw rocks at you, you're allowed to throw rocks at them. And only rocks back. If they use a handgun, you use a hand. It's not about. And then people say, well, you know, they should have used rubber bullets. And so I explained that rubber bullets, you know, are really only effective to about 100 yards. Because then they go totally out of control because they're not as aerodynamic, so they just can't function, which means it's much worse than a gun that would be using live ammunition. They say use water cannons. Well, the cannons are only good for 20 yards, 30 yards at the maximum. So you're not dealing with anything appropriate. The reality is that proportionate means, from the international point of view, and this is very important, it doesn't mean that the death, the unwanted death of an innocent civilian. Doesn't mean that at all. And every case that's come before the International Criminal Court at The Hague that had that was thrown out. The reality is that the law is very clear. It says that proportionate means that you have to do your best to try to avoid civilian casualties. Israel drops leaflets. They take SMS messages. They send all kinds of things. They say also that you have to be able to identify the target. Who is the target that you're attacking? And it has to be clear. Okay, if you miss in that target, that doesn't mean it's disproportionate. It means you missed, right? That's a big difference. You have to be able to identify a specific target that you're attacking. And the third is you're allowed to hit back so that they don't hit you again. Now, that's an important element. Otherwise, every time you get up, you have to. The idea is proportionate means that you're allowed to do all those things. Now, there is enormous elasticity in understanding that, those understandings. However, nonetheless, Israel clearly falls in to acceptable action in terms of their behavior here. Clearly.
I believe they've been inept politically, but that's a separate question.
Yes,
I agree in terms of force. It's an impossible situation. They've dealt with it, I think, as best they can. I have no magic answers, and they don't have any magic answers either. Sadly, I do believe that politically there would be ways for them to garner more support than they have garnered up to now, and they haven't handled it particularly well. The government isn't especially right. It's not especially skillful in that regard, and I regret that.
But I believe that political blunder has also happened down to the Palestinians. Because this march of return, protest of return that we're seeing now, by the way, that term of art is something that's never been critically examined, right?
Right, protest.
How is that a protest?
It's
the return to Tel Aviv, the return to Haifa, in what way is that limited to the just on this side of a line? It's not on this line. It's essentially saying return, which is why we're trying to breach this fence. This is why we're trying to infiltrate Israel. But I will say that by doing this every Friday since March, with sort of, casualties. So there was that one day that there was a number of them. But that was really the only day that the world was focused on it. I would say that they have, unlike what they've done in the past, where you have a 3-week war, and then all of a sudden you look at the body count and you see thousands of Palestinians and a dozen Israelis.
Or none. Or zero.
Or none because of Iron Dome. This has backfired on the Palestinians. That people are becoming desensitized to this every weekend.
Even the Palestinians.
Yes,
they've
really,
they're inert to that.
Yeah, they're inured to this now. Like this idea of yes, 1 or 2 were killed on Fridays. That this ongoing attempt. Also, I think that they've also exposed themselves more about the fiendishness with which the way they fight.
When they came out the first week, the first Friday, they expected 500,000 protesters. They called them protesters, which is a strange word also. So, but only about 60,000 came, actually probably closer to 40,000. And then the numbers get smaller and smaller and smaller every week. But you know what they did? They closed the malls. All the schools were closed. Everyone was expected to come. The youth were expected to come. I got to tell you something. If you know anything about teenagers, when you give them off from school or off from camp and stuff like that, you give them the option, stay home, or go out to a protest, they stayed home and they played video games. So they really played video games because that's what kids play. And so that was the winner. And they didn't go out. Only
and it was a lot safer.
And it was a lot safer. And they realized for themselves.
They figured that out.
For themselves, they decided, why should I jeopardize my life when I could be home playing whatever game it is that they're playing on. And it was a failure to them. The next week, they didn't close the schools. And as a result, many, many fewer even came out. So we're dealing with a few thousand people, 2,000, 4,000. Okay.
Which is why I'm saying, when you said about when Eric said it's politically has backfired, I think it's backfired for them worse.
Okay. And none of you so far have mentioned the media in relationship to this event.
I think the media is focused on Trump. I think Trump is the best thing for Israel on many levels in an odd way.
Again,
because
you don't think
CNN,
the media
compared
beat up on Israel?
No. Compared to what we've seen in the past with Gaza, no, absolutely is no comparison.
Well, it may not have been what it was before, but whatever reportage there was, it was virulently anti-Israel.
Of course, but it always is.
I agree with you, Mark. I think the coverage was terrible, which is why I made the point I made before. I mean, I don't think Israel can be blamed here. We know who the villain is. We know who the bad guys are. This is not a complicated situation. It's way more complicated on the West Bank. But the fact of the matter is, if you ask, what's the Israeli plan? You know, and there's a right-wing columnist who, again, makes this point week after week after week. He said, what's Israel's plan? We know that whatever the plan is, Hamas is going to reject it. We know that. But having said that, if you go to the world media or to the, for that matter, the diplomats for much of the world community, and you ask the question, what is Israel's plan? They can't tell you. The reason is Israel hasn't been able to come up with a plan.
By the way, why is that so? I mean, what I see is the following. Israel said to Gaza, we will withdraw, you'll be funded, create a Monte Carlo on the Mediterranean Sea and have a good life.
Where is that?
Oh, that was said immediately. It is, and it's been said.
Look for it.
Repeat it. Okay.
Look for it.
And and Israel said, from what the middle '90s on.
I want to correct this just a second. When Israel gave up Gaza, there was an intermediary made up of American diplomats and business people who actually bought the turnkey operations for Gaza and was supposed to hand them over to.
That was 13 years
right,
ago.
exactly. That's what he's talking about.
That
included Madeline Albright,
but don't say
and they destroyed it all.
You know that, I know that, everybody knows that. It's consistent with everything that we've been saying.
People don't know that.
What I'm suggesting is we have a crisis now, right now. People don't have long-term memories. They're not interested in a 40-year history or a 10-year history or a 5-year history. Right now, Israel should put a plan on the table. It wouldn't be terribly different from what Mark was suggesting. I could tell you what the elements of the plan are.
Of course you could.
People in Netanyahu's cabinet have been pushing him. They are saying, you know, we should build an artificial island off Gaza. He has a plan for it. Yeah, his name is Katz. He actually has a plan for it, he said, and in return, this is what we should demand. And let's get it on the table. Let's show that we're creative, that we're serious, we're prepared to go, and this is what we demand in return. Certain political conditions as set out by the quartet, and demilitarization. And this is coming from Netanyahu's cabinet.
And you are acknowledging that it's purely rhetoric. That nobody in Gaza is going to say yes to that plan.
I think there's virtually no yes. I think there's virtually no chance that there'll be a response. But
sort of a game.
Well, it's a game, and first of all, who knows? It's a game. I mean, there's always a possibility, however slight. Nonetheless, even
if Hamas accepted it, they couldn't apply it to Islamic Jihad.
Again, we're caught up in our own narrative, which is essentially
true.
Asking,
what do you get out of this
There's
plan?
no narrative.
They're just
it's
asking,
not a narrative.
What happens when
there's a reality? We're caught up in the reality, not the narrative.
What I'm suggesting is you win on two levels. You win with the media.
No, you won't.
Never.
No, you won't.
Never.
No.
There's this notion that no matter what Israel ever does, no matter what, they're always going to hate us. I think
absolutely right.
That's a dangerous
You'll
mindset.
Never get CNN
and
to
second
like
of all,
it.
in terms of international political realities, you potentially win as well.
Israel is so good now for the European Union not to be celebrating Israel every day means that no matter what Israel does.
Here's an example. The cabinet's they're having a briefing with the chief of staff, and the member of the cabinet Bennett says to the chief of staff, kids are throwing these kites and balloons into the air and they're coming down and it's terrorism. We know who they are, shoot them. Bennett says this. Chief of staff says, we don't do that. We don't shoot kids. Bennett says, but they're terrorists. He said, but we still don't shoot kids. Now, this is public knowledge within Israel. It was in all the papers. It was an obvious argument between a major member of the cabinet and the chief of staff of the military of the IDF, Israel Defense Forces. It was not covered at all in the international press because they didn't care. How could that not make Israel look good? It would make Israel look beautiful. Now, this was not intentional. This was a serious debate. By the way, it was behind closed doors, and Bennett leaked it to try to weaken the chief of staff. Didn't matter. The point is, you've got this unbelievably left approach by the Israeli army, who clearly had the justification to kill these children who were launching terrorist activities. And said, we don't do that.
Well, there's another piece to this. No one's interested in actually showing the burned wildlife and the land that's been scarred.
Even falcons.
The wildlife, right. Even the environmentalists, where are they? If you could ever say,
where
are the leftist progressive environmentalists that are saying this is an absolute outrage?
Two falcons have been put fire on them to fly.
And all of this is an argument for a plan. It's not an argument against. I mean, again, it's a mindset that says no matter what we will do, it makes no difference. No matter what we will do, no one will listen. No matter what we will do, they will hate us, and so on and so forth. I urge you to extract yourself from that way of thinking, and Israel needs to be diplomatically smart. So
I would just counter with this. I'm not saying who's right or wrong. I think Israel...
And Gaza, we all agree.
No, I'm talking about coming up with a plan. You know, Israel has been trying its best for 70 years. Jewish mothers don't want their children to die, okay? For all the jokes about Jewish mothers. But the narrative that you're giving and that J Street gives is it's our responsibility to make all the changes, and that hasn't worked. So
I didn't say that, with respect. I didn't say that. That it's our responsibility to make all the changes. I said exactly the opposite of that. I did say that we have to be creative, and that we have to look at the international media and diplomatic corps, and that we have to put out ideas and thinking that indicates our eternal aspiration to arrive at some kind of a peace agreement. So that's what I believe in.
Did you hear Benjamin Anthony's proposal?
What is it?
There are proposals, and Mordechai Kadar, Benjamin Anthony's proposal is that Egypt gives land that's contiguous with Gaza, and that they give monetary incentives. I don't have the details in my head. And monetary incentives for Palestinians, non-citizens of Israel, to move there, and they...
Yes, actually, I have heard that. But I want a proposal from the government of Israel. That's what I want. I mean, it's true, we all have our plans.
Okay, but really, the reason you say it this way, I think, is because you do believe somehow the Netanyahu government is being irresponsible.
I think it's paralyzed now in a pre-election period when the prime minister is beset by personal scandals. It has a small majority. There are a number of religious crises that could bring the government down. I think it's very difficult, given that reality, which I want to suggest to you is an accurate description of reality. It's very difficult for them to be creative diplomatically.
Okay, yes, but if they're creative in the next 6 months to 9 months, it'll still be good for you. They don't have to be creative today.
Well, the question would be good.
I don't think they care. I think it's better for him. I think that he's in a much better situation. He knows that there's no partner. He knows that there's nothing to do with Gaza, so he's only on defense issues there. So it's a non-issue, and he will gain votes as a result of it, because being strong and being defensive of Israel always gains you votes.
Okay, I want to use the remaining time, because as we tape, we are fast approaching the Jewish high holidays in the new year. And so I want to ask you each to tell me what it is that impresses you most about the state of Israel. You said, as we were talking, that unfortunately we always hear the bad about Israel, and we don't teach our children enough about the good. I don't think it has anything to do with children. I think adults cannot list for themselves the extraordinary qualities of the state of Israel and the Israeli people. So you can have many, you can have few, I don't care. Naomi, as you think about the state of Israel, so me, what about it to you is the shining example of why this is an extraordinary society?
I think the ingathering of exiles from all over the world, of all different colors, of all different religious backgrounds and cultures, most of whom have never lived in a democratic country, and creating a vibrant democracy as a woman with freedom of religion, better rights for women than we have here. And second would be the achievements that my friends in the military here tell us keep me safe here as an American citizen.
What do you say, Thane?
Just the resilience. You know, it is shocking when you think about how tiny a country it was at its very outset, and how many Israelis were killed during their first war on a percentage basis. When you think of all the wars, all the acts of terrorism, all the international condemnations, the pariah status, and yet new technologies, inventions, blooming deserts. It is extraordinary. I have no other example of a country and a people. I mean, you know, the Palestinians are happy. I can only say the word happy because there's no other explanation, to sit in refugee camps for generation after generation, holding keys to land they're never going to get back. And they're not worried about, they don't seem to care about a future. They don't really seem to care about building a nation. They certainly don't seem to care about new leadership, because this has been a big theme of what we've talked about in the last hour. Leaders that actually will take them someplace. The amount of energy, the amount of creative energy that has gone into that, I only wish, I said this once on your show, and you said, please, that can't be the answer, saying, I wonder whether the fire of innovation has been stirred by this sense of vulnerability, that kind of a culture of anxiety, of under constant threat. You know, we already learned that the startup nation owes much of its existence to the IDF. We've learned that the training of the IDF has done a lot to the way in which Israel's corporate life has emerged. But I just think that's something that we don't, you look at countries around the world where nothing's happening. There's literally nothing happening. Has anyone seen anything happening in Luxembourg? What's actually happening there? The amount of energy and innovation in Israel and the resilience, given what they've been up against, and still are. I mean, this is what I was saying before about when they say, we'll pass any basic law, and we don't really care what you think. It's because if all the resolutions in the Security Council are about attacking Israel and announce Syria, you can imagine how an Israeli is going, oh, this is just ridiculous. We're just going to live our lives, right? If your focus is on us, right? If one Palestinian is killed, it's a war crime. But you can kill 500,000 Syrians and no one notices it. By the way, a few months ago, as this civil war in Syria was coming to an end, I noted in the paper, actually I appeared on a cable station in which I talked about this, and I said, you know, the United States was leading forces in one of these skirmishes with the Assad regime, against the Assad regime. And it turns out the American-led liberation forces ended up firing on a few buildings and killing 200 civilians. No one cared. No one said anything. There were no resolutions anywhere. Where was the condemnation against the United States? None of you probably knew this happened, right? All right, you knew this happened. But no, actually, you'd think that CNN would have stopped reporting on Trump, saying, oh my God, a terrible thing happened in Syria. You know, in our efforts to try to bring an end to the civil war, our coalition forces fired on the wrong building and there are 200 people killed. And it's not a story. And the Israelis, one Palestinian is a war crime. So again, one wonders whether in light of all of that attention, they've sort of, they look forward and they've taken themselves to the part that they're the 8th most powerful country in the world.
Micah, what is it that you just thrills you about the state of Israel?
I really am excited about the fact that Israel is on the international arena, on the radar for culinary excellence. They are, you can't literally turn on a cooking show without seeing an Israeli. They're all over the place. They're in the chefs in some of the best places in the world now. It's remarkable what Israel has done. I mean, we often focus on biotech and computers, and sometimes if we're really good, we actually get into the literature and the music, of course, because Eurovision and everything else. But just in terms of just cooking alone, Israel has excelled. They're literally on the cutting edge of everything. And that leads to my second element, because I'm really a romantic. And that really is the Zionist message. And that really is the message of Israel itself. That is that, not romance in terms of sexual issues, romance in terms of the ability to achieve a goal, to set a goal and to achieve it, and to be a wondrous environment. And that's what Israel is doing. And that makes me feel excited to be a part of that, even if sometimes I'm 6,000 miles away. And in many ways, being unabashedly pro-Israel, and actually I am an Israeli, being unabashedly pro-Israel from afar is my way of connecting in that way, romantically, to a mission which makes us relevant. It makes our Judaism relevant. It makes our peoplehood relevant. It makes my observance as a halachic Jew relevant. It makes my life relevant. And Israel does that for me. I couldn't imagine what my parents and grandparents experienced without it. I know what it was like for me 20 years ago, and was far less because of the continued burgeoning of an Israeli society. We might not always like what it does or agree with what it does, but we can't deny the power and the romance that's involved in it. And that's the real hook, by the way, for the younger generation. The hook is getting them romantically involved. Because once that happens, they'll be significantly changed, transformed, and bettered. And we'll be better for it.
Lovely. Okay, so the question is, what is it that you just love about the state of Israel that you think is so wonderful that makes it wonderful for you?
As I said, I define myself as a Zionist. Zionism is about the creative survival of the Jewish people. The state of Israel came into being in order to assure the creative survival of the Jewish people. So I look at Israel now and I see two components of that that made that a reality. It was supposed to be a refuge for Jews who needed it. That was a primary component of what Herzl thought of and wrote about in his time. That was necessary then. That's necessary now. That's necessary today.
Unfortunately.
There's not a single Jewish community in Europe today that can be said to be secure. Not one. Research came out within the last 60 days and asked European Jews, do they feel safe wearing some public adornment that would identify them as a Jew, which would mean a Star of David, or would mean a kippah? 51% said no. 27% of European Jews said that they don't feel secure about their personal future. And in 2015, when you had all those problems in France, about 40 and 15,000 Jews picked up and went to Israel. Israel right now, today, is the place where if there's a crisis in Hungary or in Poland or in Russia, God forbid, those Jews can go there. That is tremendously important to me. And then the second aspect is Israel was supposed to create for us a public Judaism. Now, there's pluralism issues. I've talked about that 100 times. You know how important that is to me. Put that aside for a minute. The fact of the matter is, I do a mitzvah in my house, you do a mitzvah in your house. All right, that's our business. But there has to be one place in the world where we have a public Judaism. So what does that mean? That means a place where the language you speak in the street is Hebrew. That means that the rhythm of the calendar is set by the Jewish holy days. That means in the public forum, when you make an argument drawing on Jewish sources and using Jewish values. Public Judaism exists because of Israel. And while that may not be our Judaism, it's absolutely essential to have a vibrant Judaism as we move to the future. Israel has given us those things. It's the only way we can get them. And we all need to be forever grateful for it.
Oh, that was fabulous. By the way, I think each of you put your finger on a different dimension. I want to tell you what's important to me, and you can react to it if you'd like. Very often people talk about the high-tech achievements of the State of Israel. I'm thrilled that there's, that they created a camera that can look inside my body and help me survive. I'm thrilled there's a chip in every cell phone. But for me, it's not about the high-tech that makes me just thrilled with the State of Israel. I'm thrilled that I'm thrilled with who the Israeli people are. I'm thrilled that there is an Israeli people who not only drop leaflets before they drop bombs, and then they drop fake bombs first, and they make the phone calls telling people to leave. but they won't shoot a child. Your story of the chief of staff saying to Bennett, I'm sorry, the Israeli army does not shoot children. That to me is what Israel is all about. That's what I love about it. I love about the fact that Israel's at Haiti before anybody else gets there. I love the fact that Israel's on the Syrian border dragging wounded Syrian soldiers across into Israel, giving them medical aid in secret, sending them back in secret, because that's what Israelis do. It impresses me that there are Palestinians on the West Bank who, if they're ill, they will make their way to a checkpoint because they know if they go to an Israeli hospital, they'll be taken care of in the right way. It's important to me that Mahmoud Abbas's mother is treated for cancer in an Israeli hospital. That is stunning to me. I'm impressed by the extent to which the state of Israel has lived with an element inside it that is seditious. There's an element of Israeli society that wants to destroy the state of Israel. I know of no other society that would tolerate that. Israel tolerates it. America would not tolerate a celebration of 9/11. Israel tolerates a celebration of the Nakba. Israel tolerates a political party in the Knesset of Arabs whose goal is to destroy the state of Israel. I know of no other democracy in the world, including America, that would ever tolerate such a perspective in their own parliament legislature. Israel does. It thrills me that Arab Israelis are found everywhere in Israeli life. If you go to an Israeli hospital, some of the best doctors and nurses are Israeli Arabs. There are Arab Israeli lawyers. It thrills me that there's an Israeli Supreme Court justice who's an Arab Israeli.
There used to be two.
There used to be another. He's the second one.
Right. No, but there was once two at the same time.
Not Chief Justice.
No, not Chief
Only
Justice.
one.
But two at the same time.
But to understand, the Chief Justice of the State of Israel is an Arab Israeli who, by the way, will not sing Hatikva, and nobody makes him. That's incredible to me about the State of Israel. And what's also incredible to me is every time I meet Israelis, they are lovely, despite the fact that they are living in a war that began on May 14th, 1948, actually May 13th, 1948, has existed to this day. Every Israeli lives in a state of war, which no American has ever done. And anytime America's been in war, it's been quick to pass all kind of draconian laws limiting freedoms in this country. The Israeli people remain lovely. They remain vibrant. They're interested. They're interesting. They have fun. And they never seem to be living under the burden of what we see on television all the time. The Israeli who we talk to never complains. You said it, no Israeli mother ever wants to lose a child. No Israeli father ever wants to lose a child. But they live anyway, and they live happily, and they are always embracing of people who come and see them, and they want you for Shabbat, and they want you to go. Their Shabbat is a trip down to the Dead Sea, so come with us in our car. To me, it's the spirit of the Israeli people, the ethic of the Israeli people, and they do live Jewish ethics. The idea that, well, I sometimes hear people say, I want Israel to represent Jewish values, as if they don't. Israel represents Jewish values in a way that is exemplary for every Jew who lives anywhere in the world. To me, it's the Israeli people that make Israel so extraordinary and so wonderful.
Well said.
Totally agree.
Thank you.
You got 5 people to agree.
That's lovely. I cannot thank the 4 of you enough. You know, people who are watching on TV don't know how much effort it takes you. You have to come out to our studio, then you spend an entire day with me, and you give me a lot of time. But most, you're willing to share your insights and your wisdom. And I am so proud. It makes me so proud to be able to present the four of you to our audience, the contribution you make outside of JBS and inside JBS is extraordinary. You should be very, very proud of what you do. I love you so much. It is always, and we'll never have it without you sitting right next to me. I love you so much. We've been together for so long. You've done so much to make this possible. No one like you, my friend. No, in the best way. Your breadth of knowledge and your quality of soul is extraordinary, and it's an honor to have you part of this panel. And you, my friend, we've been together forever.
Right, we've known each other the longest of all.
And I want you to know, you represent in the best way a position center left, and I'm always thrilled that you're here to argue for yourself, and you do it in the most lovely way, and you are a lovely, lovely person. I am so proud to know all of you and to have you as my friends and to have you here on JBS.
Thank you.
And there you have it. My thanks to Naomi Vilko, to Thane Rosenbaum, to Eric Yaffe, to Micah Halpern. All of them make an enormous contribution to Jewish life, and it's been thrilling for me to be able to present them to you. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have to any of the ideas expressed on this edition of L'chaim. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook page, or tweet me. I look forward to hearing from many of you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'chaim, my friends, to life.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.